Chapter 1. The Boy at the Window. London 3:17 a.m. The storm clawed at the sky, a furious beast of thunder and wind. It had no grace, just raw, unrelenting power. Raindrops struck the Darling residence with bullets of water, making the windows shudder in their frames. The old manor in Kensington was a fading relic, draped in ivy and the slow decay of time. Upstairs in the converted attic bedroom, Wendy Darling, just past her 18th birthday, sat cross-legged on her bed, pen trembling in her fingers as she scribbled into her worn leather journal. The same dream again, black birds with eyes like people and skis that bled. Lightning flared, illuminating the entire room in a brief, bone-white flash. Wendy blinked into the darkness. A branch scraped across the rooftop like nails on slate. And then she heard it. Not the creaking floorboards, not the thunder, but a deliberate rhythmic scratching at the window. She slowly looked up. A silhouette stood beyond the glass. Human-shaped still, watching. For a moment her mind failed to make sense of it. There was no balcony, no ledge, just open air and a 5-story drop to the garden below. She froze, her pen slipping from her hand onto the blankets. A primal fear buzzed under her skin. Then the shadow smiled. She rose to her feet as if pulled by a thread. Her slippers made no sound on the wooden floor. Her hand reached for the latch, heart pounding. A voice, her mother, or maybe her own, echoed in her memory. Not everything that knocks should be invited in. She opened the window. Wind and rain burst inward, and with them tumbled a young man, 18, maybe 19. His movements were fast, fluid, more feline than human. His clothes were damp with mist but not soaked. A loose forest green shirt hung open at the collar, leather cords and moss clinging to his pants. A hunting knife glinted at his hip. His hair was dark, messy, wild. His eyes caught hers, brilliant green, bright with intelligence and mischief. But behind them, something heavy, old. "You're Wendy," he said. His voice was low, with the cadence of someone who spoke seldom but always meant what he said. She backed away. "How do you know my name?" He gave a half-bow, dramatic and sharp. "Because I've been watching you." The room seemed smaller, the shadows stretched longer. "And who are you?" she asked. The smile returned. "Peter Pan." Her spine stiffened. Not because she believed him, but because she had written that name before. Not in a child's voice, but in her own. Her stories of Peter Pan were laced with darkness, ink-stained fantasies about eternal youth, seductive danger, and a wild place beyond time. "You're not real," she whispered. Peter stepped closer. He didn't argue. "You write about me. You dream about me," he said, gesturing to the stack of journals on her desk. "I came because you're ready." Ready for what? To leave this place, to see what's on the other side of the story. He turned, walked to the open window and stepped out onto air. Wendy rushed forward. "Wait." But he wasn't falling. He was hovering. Peter floated 5 stories above the garden, silhouetted against a sky full of lightning veins. The wind didn't touch him. Rain parted around him like he was made of a different substance. He held out his hand. "Come with me, Wendy." Her brain screamed all the logical things: hallucination, stranger danger, trauma-induced delusion. But her body moved. She grabbed her coat, slipped on boots, and stepped onto the sill. He didn't coax her, he simply waited. She placed her hand in his, and the world vanished. The sky ripped open. They flew. The city was below them, drenched rooftops, blinking towers, streets winding like veins through a sleeping giant. The wind howled in her ears, but it didn't cut. Instead, it lifted her, lifted them. Wendy laughed, disbelieving and alive, adrenaline pouring through her limbs. Peter didn't laugh. He watched her with a calm, distant gaze, like he'd seen this moment before. "Where are we going?" she shouted over the roar. "To the place where lost things go," he said. They flew beyond the clouds where stars burned brighter than they should. These stars moved too fast, too sentient. One blinked. Another spun lazily as they passed. Something watched from above. Wendy's stomach clenched. Below, the ocean turned black. Jagged mountains rose like claws from the sea. A crescent-shaped island shimmered in the distance, cloaked in violet mist. Trees breathed in unnatural blues. The beaches were pale bone. The moon overhead was far too close. Neverland. It looked like a dream drawn by a mad god. They descended fast, too fast. The air grew dense with magic, thick and metallic, like the taste of blood in the mouth after biting your tongue. Wendy stumbled as they landed in a clearing surrounded by gnarled trees. The ground felt warm, pulsing faintly beneath her boots. The stars blinked slower here, waiting for something. Out of the forest, figures emerged. 8 of them, all young adults, no younger than 18 but not older than 22. Scarred, dirty, hollow-eyed, the lost boys. They circled like wolves, not boys. All of them watched her with varying degrees of interest, suspicion, hunger. Peter stepped beside her, raising his hand. "This is Wendy. She's here to help." A few exchanged glances. One of them, tall with hollow cheeks, muttered, "Another one." "What does she do?" another asked, stepping closer. "Is she a fighter or a dreamer?" "I don't know yet," Peter said, his voice carrying weight. Wendy clenched her fists. "Help you do what exactly?" Peter looked at her for a long moment, his face suddenly unreadable. "To stop Hook," he said at last. Wendy's lips parted, as in Captain Hook. Peter nodded. "He's returned. And he's bringing something worse." The air went still. A distant growl echoed, too low to be thunder, too near to be safe. Peter didn't flinch, but his hand hovered near his knife. A tiny, high-pitched sound broke the silence. Ding! Wendy turned and froze. A small, glowing figure stepped from the shadows, wings like razors, body encased in glimmering light, hair of molten gold and eyes like dying suns. Tinker Bell. The pixie glared at Wendy and smiled like a serpent. Chapter 2: Flight Through Shadows. Neverland was not sleeping. As Wendy stood under the eerie twilight canopy, surrounded by the lost boys and the burning gaze of Tinker Bell, the island itself felt alive. The trees whispered in no language she knew, and the wind didn't rustle, it sifted like fingers through hair. There was no true day, no true night. Only dusk, eternal and bruised. Peter turned from the clearing and walked toward the forest's edge. "We move before the shadows notice you're here." "Shadows?" Wendy asked, following him instinctively. Peter didn't answer. Tinker Bell flitted beside him, her wings emitting a high-pitched whine. Not the pleasant, jingling chime Wendy remembered from childhood stories, but something mechanical, brittle. She flew in erratic bursts, never straying far from Peter, casting hateful glances back at Wendy like she was poison incarnate. The lost boys fell in behind them. Barefoot, silent, they moved like ghosts. The forest swallowed them. Trees arched unnaturally high, their trunks slick with moss that pulsed faintly with an inner glow. Leaves the size of sails rustled above. Occasionally, one would drop, not with a whisper, but with a thud that sent small tremors through the earth. "What exactly are we avoiding?" Wendy asked Peter as they climbed a narrow slope blanketed in glowing fungus. Peter kept walking. "You haven't seen them yet." "Seen what?" "Shadows," a voice answered behind her. She turned to see a lost boy, dark-skinned, tall, sharp-eyed, his voice low and somber. "They aren't people, not really, more like echoes of things that shouldn't exist." Peter glanced back. "They're pieces of us that Neverland took. Not all of us get them back." Wendy blinked. "Your shadows are alive." "Sometimes," Peter said. "And sometimes they lie." Lightning forked silently across the sky overhead. Wendy felt a pressure in her chest, Not quite fear, but something more primal. Her instincts whispered turn back. Her pulse replied go deeper. They passed a lake that reflected no one's face. Just the sky and sometimes something else. The others didn't look into it. One boy, tall, shivering, refused to even step near its edge. They reached a rise where the trees parted into a narrow stone trail. It sloped upward toward a twisted outcrop that jutted like a broken finger. From there, the whole island sprawled beneath them, swamps that boiled, beaches littered with bones, and mountains stitched to the sky with chains of light. And far in the distance, atop a massive, jagged cliff, loomed a black fortress shaped like a split skull. Wendy's breath caught. Is that where? Yes, Peter said. Hook's ship is docked there. She squinted. I thought it was a ship. It was, Peter said, before he drowned it. A moment of silence stretched. Wendy could feel everyone watching her, judging whether she belonged here, whether she'd make it, whether she'd break. Peter gestured to the cliffs. That's where he took the others. He's building something, warping Neverland. Wendy shook her head. What kind of pirate builds a fortress in a skull? Peter turned to her slowly. James Hook stopped being a pirate a long time ago. Now he's just a monster. A low click echoed across the cliffs. Not thunder, not wind. Metal. Peter stiffened. We need to move. The lost boys scattered into the trees without a word, vanishing into shadows like they'd rehearsed this 1,000 times. Peter grabbed Wendy's hand. Hold tight and don't look down. Before she could question it, his wings unfolded. Not wings of feathers or fairy light, but shadows, writhing, translucent, woven from the very fabric of Neverland's sky. They pulsed once, and then they were airborne. They didn't soar. They fell sideways. Wendy screamed not from fear, but from the disorientation. Gravity was a joke here. North pulled like down. The sky twisted. Clouds reformed into shapes she recognized from dreams. And worse, they passed through things. Dark things. One shape darted beside them, humanoid, featureless, clinging to the sky like a stain. Wendy turned to look at it fully. Its head snapped toward her. Its eyes were empty voids. Peter cursed and dove sharply. The thing followed. That's a shadow, she gasped. No, he said, that one's mine. Wendy looked at him and saw something change in his face. Pain, shame, fury. They slammed into a different clearing, this one colder, wetter, filled with tall reeds and insect chittering. A crumbling stone tower sat in the center like a wound. Peter dragged her behind a root wall as the shadow streaked overhead, searching. When it vanished into the fog, Peter exhaled hard. I can't outrun it anymore, he said, mostly to himself. What was that? Wendy demanded. It looked like you. It was me, he whispered, once. He stood, brushing himself off. His expression hardened. Neverland remembers everything we've done, even the things we want to forget. Wendy's chest ached. She looked at Peter again, at the youthful body that didn't match the weight in his eyes. There were centuries in his stare, scars without wounds. You said Hook is building something, she said. What kind of monster is he now? Peter hesitated. Then he's feeding the island. To what? To himself. Wendy's throat went dry. What does that mean? Peter's gaze darkened. It means the longer he stays here, the more real he becomes, the more he takes from us, from the land, from time. They heard movement. Tinker Bell arrived, not flying but walking. She looked different now, taller. Her wings dragged behind her like broken glass. Her hair was tangled with nettles. She didn't look at Wendy. We have to go, she said. Hook sent scouts. Peter nodded, then turned to Wendy. We're going to the Bone Orchard next. Why? He looked over his shoulder, eyes glinting. Because that's where the bodies are buried. Chapter 3. The Island That Breathes. The Bone Orchard was not on any map, not even Peter. They walked single file, deeper into the humid throat of the jungle, where roots snarled like ropes across the ground and the air clung to their skin like sweat. It didn't feel like a forest. It felt like the inside of something, alive, pulsing, slow to anger. Every tree had eyes, every vine a pulse, and the dirt it breathed. Wendy brushed against a trunk and jerked back. It was warm and beating. "The island is alive," she whispered. Peter nodded. "It always has been, but now it's changing." Tinker Bell moved ahead of them, eyes sharp, wings twitching like antennae. She hadn't spoken to Wendy since the clearing, but her presence never relented, circling, watching, assessing like a predator sizing up its rival. They descended a slope into the heart of a swamp. The air grew thick with fog and rot. Shapes moved beneath the green water, some large, some human. None surfaced. A narrow causeway of moss-covered bones formed a path ahead. Femurs, jawbones, ribs, all bleached by time, arranged like a spine through the marsh. "Welcome," Peter said grimly, "to the bone orchard." Wendy stepped onto the bone path, her boots clicking against ancient death. "Why are there this many bodies here?" "Because some children do grow up," Peter said, not looking at her. "And Neverland doesn't like that." Lightning rolled through the sky above, without thunder, just light, a warning. They moved forward. The orchard expanded, bones rising on either side like twisted sculptures, some woven into nests, others fused into trees. Skulls stared with hollow sockets from every angle. Some smiled. "This is where the lost boys who didn't follow the rules ended up," said a lost boy behind her. His name was Kale. He couldn't have been older than 20. His skin bore the silver sheen of old burns and his eyes were ringed with insomnia. Wendy turned to him. "Rules. No falling in love," Kale said softly. "No wanting to leave, no remembering home, and above all, no growing up. Peter punishes them." Peter's head turned slowly. "No," he said, "Neverland does." They reached the center of the orchard, a clearing ringed by stone monoliths. In the center, an altar of twisted iron. Upon it, what remained of someone. Ragged clothes, a rusted hook. Peter stared at the corpse. Hook had left this. "A message?" Wendy asked. Peter shook his head. "A lure." The wind shifted. The bones around them rattled, individually then all at once, like keys shaken in 1,000 hands. The jungle fell silent. Then a voice. "Lost are we." The words did not come from a direction. They came from everywhere. Peter's dagger was already in his hand. His eyes narrowed. "Show yourself, James," he growled. A shadow peeled from the altar. Not a man, not a ghost. Both. Captain Hook emerged wearing no pirate garb, no flamboyant hat. Just black leathers cracked with age, stitched with sinew. His left arm was gone, the replacement not a silver hook, but an articulated claw of bone and shadow. His face was gaunt, eyes sunken but blazing, and his mouth too wide. Wendy stepped back. Her body wanted to run. Her mind froze. Hook said, smiling, "The girl." "Don't touch her," Peter said coldly. "Touch," Hook laughed. "Peter, my boy, I'm past touching. I only consume now." Kale raised his blade. "We should run." Too late. The ground erupted. Vines lashed from below, tearing through the bone path, flinging lost boys into the air like dolls. One screamed. Another vanished beneath the swamp. Wendy ducked instinctively, but the vines didn't reach for her. They reached for Peter. "Go," Peter shouted. "Get her out of here." Kale grabbed Wendy's wrist and yanked her backward through the altar's ring. The jungle warped around them, branches elongating into corridors, light flickering like fireflies before a storm. Behind them, the sounds of battle, screaming, clashing, the shriek of something that wasn't human. Peter didn't call after her. He was fighting the island itself. They ran. Branches scraped their arms, roots tried to trip them. The forest was reshaping, resisting escape. Tinker Bell burst overhead in a streak of light, her form flaring white-hot. She shrieked in Fey, words Wendy couldn't understand but felt like razors in her skull. "She's summoning something," Cale shouted. "Don't look up." Wendy, of course, looked up. A shape passed overhead, massive, winged, stitched together from feathers and rot. It had no eyes. Its mouth was a vertical slit. It screamed like a falling star. "What is that?" Cale spat. "A never-beast hook, been breeding them." The creature dove, its scream shattering glass-like pods in nearby trees. Green vapor spilled into the jungle. Vines retracted. The swamp recoiled. Tinker Bell landed beside Wendy, panting, her skin cracked with light. "We have seconds." "Peter," Wendy began. "Will meet us," Tink snapped, "or he won't keep moving." Wendy followed, heart slamming against her ribs. They burst into a hollow carved into a tree the size of a castle. Inside, glowing mushrooms lined the walls. The air was warm, quiet, temporarily. Cale slumped to the ground, bleeding from a shallow cut. Tinker Bell floated upward and hovered before Wendy, still burning faintly. "You're not ready for this place," Tink said flatly. Wendy met her gaze. "I didn't ask to be brought here." Tink's lips curled. "But you didn't say no either." The glow dimmed. Tinker Bell turned away. Minutes passed, the silence swelled. Then the shadows at the hollow's edge parted. Peter stepped through. Blood on his shirt, mud on his boots, but alive. He looked at Wendy, not with relief, not with warmth. With guilt. "He let me live," Peter said quietly. "That means he's winning." Chapter 4. Blood in Belladonna. The hollow tree was still bleeding when morning never came. Thick amber sap oozed from a fresh wound in the bark, pooling at Peter's feet. It smelled sweet, too sweet. Beneath it, mushrooms glowed in patterns that resembled runes. Tinker Bell whispered among them, her voice a string of fractured syllables. The lost boys sat in a quiet ring around the interior, eyes cast down, too exhausted to speak. Wendy hadn't slept, she couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the bone orchard, the bones vibrating with unseen breath, the altar, Hook's crooked smile. The scream of the Neverbeast still echoed in her skull. She stood alone at the hollow's mouth, looking out into the swamp fog curling at the roots beyond. Peter approached behind her. "You held your own." She turned to him. His eyes were shadowed with exhaustion, his movements slower now. The flight, the battle, the escape, it had cost him. "You weren't supposed to let him take control of the island," she said quietly. "Were you?" Peter said nothing for a moment. He wasn't supposed to survive the first time. Wendy leaned against the trunk, arms crossed. "What is this place really, Peter? You call it Neverland, but it feels like something that's remembering us." Peter lowered himself beside her. "It remembers everything, the things we wanted, the things we tried to forget." She glanced sideways. "You're still not telling me the truth." Peter smiled bitterly. "Not all of it, no." He stood. "But if you want to understand this place, come with me." They moved in silence through twisted paths. Tinker Bell didn't follow this time. She remained behind, still half-lit, still humming to herself in strange tongues. Peter led Wendy up a narrow trail that coiled through spiraled trees. The vegetation here was different. Black petals, ivory thorns, everything poisonous and beautiful. Ahead, the terrain opened into a natural amphitheater, a wide circle of stone, half overgrown, rimmed with thorned roses that pulsed faintly red. At its center stood a pool of thick, crimson liquid. It was not water. Wendy stepped closer, frowning. "Is that blood?" "Not exactly," Peter said. "It's called the Belladonna Pool. This is where Neverland grows its memory and its magic." She knelt near the edge. The surface of the pool shimmered, swirling images dancing across it, faces, eyes, screams cut short. Sometimes a lullaby, sometimes her own reflection aging rapidly. Peter spoke softly. This is where I bring the lost boys who want to forget. Forget what? Pain, loss, who they were before. The belladonna gives them peace. She looked at him sharply. You mean it erases them? Peter shrugged, unconcerned. Some people would rather be lost than broken. He reached into a pouch at his side and drew a small vial. A black liquid sloshed inside. What is that? Refined belladonna, he said. I take it before I sleep. Otherwise, the island shows me things I've buried too deep. She stared at the vial in his hand. You drug yourself to forget your guilt. He looked at her then, really looked. If I didn't, I'd tear myself apart. Wendy stood and took a step back. And you give this to the others. They ask for it. They don't know what they're asking for. Peter's face darkened. This is Neverland, Wendy. There are no clean choices here, just the ones that let us survive another night. She turned to the pool again. It reflected a girl with hollow eyes, her. I don't want to forget, she said. Peter's voice dropped. That's what makes you dangerous. That night, Wendy wandered alone. The lost boys were quiet, camped in broken tree hollows and fungus nests. Some stared at nothing. Others whispered in half-sleep. She found Cale sitting by a smoldering fire, feeding inedible scraps to the flames. They say you didn't take the belladonna, he said. I didn't, she replied. He nodded. Good, the ones who don't, they dream. Sometimes they remember too much. Sometimes that's worse. Have you, she asked. He nodded slowly. I remember my real name, my little sister's voice, my mother's laugh, all of it. And it makes this place harder, but I'd rather feel it than become like them. He glanced toward a lost boy curled in a tree nook, eyes vacant, humming to himself. Toby drank too much belladonna. He thinks he's still 12. Wendy's stomach churned. Cale leaned in. You need to watch Peter. He's not who he was when this started. I know. No, Cale said firmly. I mean it, he's splitting. Sometimes he's him. Sometimes he's that thing with the wings. Wendy felt a chill. The shadow. Cale nodded. It used to follow him, now it wears him sometimes. She turned toward the jungle beyond, its breath rising in warm plumes. Where it coming from? He hesitated. From the hollow below, the roots of Neverland, no one goes there. I might, she whispered. He looked at her sideways. You want to end this, don't you? She didn't answer, she didn't have to. Back at the camp, Peter stood alone. His hands trembled. He stared at the vial of belladonna, then hurled it against a tree. The glass shattered. Black liquid spilled and hissed into the soil. From the shadows, something watched. A figure with no face, just a grin. The shadow smiled wider. Chapter 5, Hook's Wake. The black sea writhed beneath the cliff like a living thing. It wasn't water anymore, not really. It hissed and foamed in unnatural patterns, thick as oil and dark as pitch, reflecting no moonlight, because there was no moon. Neverland's sky had shifted again. Above the horizon, a swirling void loomed where the stars should have been. A ship lay docked in the cliffside, no longer a vessel but a fused monstrosity of driftwood, iron, bone, and flesh. Once known as the Jolly Roger, it had been repurposed into something grotesque. A spire-shaped citadel crawling with vines that breathed and metal that screamed when touched. Inside, Captain James Hook stood alone in a chamber of polished stone and pulsating light. He wore no jacket, no feathered hat, just a long black coat etched with glowing runes, stitched into the lining with hair. His claw, now fused bone and cursed shadow, clicked rhythmically against the stone floor. A figure knelt before him, trembling. A lost boy. Naked, trembling, scarred across the face with what looked like burns. You followed her, Hook said, voice slow, measured. You saw her with him. The boy, probably 18, nodded mutely. And yet you come back to me. I wanted to be brave, the boy choked. But the others, they... Hook stepped forward, his boots making no sound. The boy flinched. Please, I didn't mean to betray you, I just... Hook's claw opened. It did not strike, it did not cut. It touched the boy's chest and drank. The boy arched backward as tendrils of black vapor pulled from his skin, his eyes rolling white as his memories, his fears, his self were drawn into Hook's hand. When it was done, the boy collapsed hollowed. Hook let the body fall. Behind him, a great iron mechanism shifted, a throne of bone, a cage of glass. Inside it, something moved, a hunched figure humming an old lullaby. Hook turned to the creature. Soon, he whispered, he'll come for her, and when he does, the island will finish what it began. The creature pressed its forehead to the glass. Is it really her? Hook's expression twitched. Wendy Darling groaned, curious, defiant. The thing in the glass laughed softly, brokenly, just like her mother. Back at the hollow tree, Wendy awoke with a scream. Not because of a nightmare, but because the sky was burning. Orange light poured in through the trees. Not sunlight, Neverland had none of that, but firelight. Something was ablaze. She ran from the hollow, heart racing. Above the treetops, black smoke coiled like a dragon. Screams echoed from the northern ridgeline, lost boys calling for help. Peter was already sprinting up the slope, sword drawn. Tinker Bell shot past them, a trail of light and sound following her like a banshee's wail. The forest thinned. They reached a plateau overlooking the ridge. Below, a second camp burned, one of the outposts the lost boys had used to scout Hook's territory. Tents reduced to ash, trees weeping flame, and amidst the destruction, shadows moved, dark figures in the shape of men but stretched unnaturally tall and thin. Wendy froze. They're not real, she whispered. They are now, Peter growled. Hook been feeding them with belladonna. He's weaponized memory. He dove into the chaos. The lost boys clashed with the shadow things in a blur of blades and teeth. Shadows didn't bleed. They howled when struck, but didn't fall. One leapt onto a boy and sank into him, disappearing. The boy screamed and began striking his own face, tearing at his eyes. Peter cut through three in a blink. His movements were precise, lethal, but something about his form shimmered. His shadow was fighting alongside him. It moved just a heartbeat out of sync. Wendy drew a stolen dagger and ran to help Kale, who was cornered against a tree, blade shaking. She drove the knife through a shadow's neck. It evaporated in a burst of black ash. Kale gasped, panting. They're faster now. They're not just echoes anymore, she said. They're soldiers. A roar interrupted them. From the flames emerged a new figure, Hook's lieutenant. He was tall, covered in twisted armor sewn with scales. A mask of gold fused to his face. His arms ended in twin scythe-like appendages. Tinker Bell dove for him first. He batted her out of the sky with one sweep. She hit the ground hard, her glow dimmed. Peter turned, eyes blazing. The battle became a blur. Steel rang, the wind shrieked, the forest bent as if the island itself recoiled. Peter met the lieutenant head-on. Their clash sparked fire through the trees. Magic pulsed with each strike. Wendy could barely follow it, but she saw the moment when Peter faltered. The lieutenant grinned and slashed, cutting across Peter's ribs. Blood sprayed, Peter dropped to one knee. Wendy screamed. The shadow stepped forward, interposing itself, and let out a sound that split the world. The lieutenant recoiled, shrieking. His mask cracked. Peter surged back to his feet, drove his blade into the man's gut, and twisted. The lieutenant fell, convulsing. The shadows around them melted back into nothing. Silence. The flames died suddenly, like breath pulled from a candle. Peter stood panting, covered in blood and staring at his own shadow, which now stood fully apart from him, tall, grinning, dripping with darkness. It bowed to him, then vanished. Back at the hollow, Wendy helped bind Peter's wounds. He sat shirtless, sweat slick, with a gash across his ribs that shimmered faintly with unnatural gold. "You're bleeding magic," she murmured. Peter didn't meet her eyes. "It's in me now, all of it." "Hook doing." "Mine too," he admitted. She looked at him, really looked. "What is he after, Peter?" Peter stared into the fire. "Not just me, not just Neverland. He's after the end of the story. He wants to rewrite it." Wendy felt her skin crawl. "Rewrite what?" Peter looked at her then, and in his eyes something shattered. "You." Chapter 6. The crocodile sleeps no more. The marshes south of the hollow tree were forbidden. Even Peter avoided them. The ground there pulsed with deep vibration, not like footsteps or beasts moving, but like breathing, the kind that came from something enormous, something submerged. It had once been called Crocodile Bay. No one called it that anymore. 3 days after the ambush, the lost boys were restless. Half their outposts had fallen. 3 had vanished without a trace, only shadow stains and half-melted bones left behind. Tinker Bell no longer lit the hollows. She sat in silence now, sharpening a long splinter of iron. Her wings dragged behind her like dead leaves. Peter hadn't left the tree in a full day. He sat curled in the highest branch, silent, unmoving, his shadow hanging from a lower bough, watching the camp with a grin. Cale approached Wendy near the edge of the glade, eyes dark-rimmed. "The boys are losing faith." "He saved them," Wendy said. "He fought. And bled magic. That scares them more than it inspires." Wendy glanced toward Peter. He hadn't blinked in an hour. "He's changing." "No," Cale whispered. "He's breaking." That night, Peter descended just past midnight, barefoot and pale. He found Wendy sitting at the edge of the camp, knees drawn up, eyes scanning the dark. "I need your help," he said. Wendy nodded without hesitation. "Where are we going?" "Where the island ends," he said. "Where it sleeps." She didn't ask questions. They traveled alone, slipping into the southern marshes before dawn. The air here was wet and metallic. The trees were sparser, their trunks wider than houses, their roots submerged in black water. Fog clung to their ankles like fingers. Peter led with careful steps, his posture tense, head low. "What are we looking for?" Wendy whispered. Peter's voice was flat. "Time." Ahead, the marsh opened into a sunken basin surrounded by obsidian rock. The trees here grew twisted horizontally, their limbs curving like vertebrae. Something ancient had collapsed here, something buried. In the center of the basin was a crater filled with thick green water, still and smooth as glass. Wendy felt it immediately. A pull like gravity, like dread. "What is this place?" she asked. Peter didn't answer. He walked toward the edge and sat cross-legged, gazing into the depths. Wendy joined him. The water reflected nothing, not the trees, not the sky, not even them. And beneath the surface, movement. Peter whispered, "This is where he died." Wendy frowned. "Who?" Peter's hand hovered above the water. "The crocodile." Wendy blinked. "That's a story." Peter's voice was low. "It was." He closed his eyes. "Hook wasn't always a monster. He was a boy like me. We both were, but he feared time, obsessed over it. Would scream when the clock struck midnight. He hated endings." Wendy whispered, "So you fed the crocodile a clock?" Peter turned to her slowly. "I fed it time itself." The water rippled. Wendy stood. "You mean literally?" Peter nodded. "Every second stolen from those who stayed too long here. Every moment Neverland erased. I poured it into the beast. It became hunger. Hook tried to kill it." She stared into the pit. "And did he?" Peter's voice cracked. "He fed it himself." Suddenly a sound. A single tick. Then another. From the pit. Tick, tick. The surface of the water began to bubble, slightly, rhythmically. Wendy backed away. Peter. But Peter remained still, eyes closed. It knows I'm here. The ticking quickened. Something vast shifted in the depths. Tick, tick, tick. Then silence. And then a voice, impossibly deep. You're late. The water erupted. A column of green-black sludge spewed skyward. From it rose an eye, no, not an eye, a clock face. Its hands spun wildly, and around it teeth. Massive concentric rows of yellowed bone. Slime dripped from jaws that could crush forests. Its tail whipped through the basin, shattering stone. The crocodile had returned. Peter stood facing it. I brought her, he said. Wendy turned, startled. What? The crocodile hissed, its voice a rumble. You bring Time's child into my den. She has to see you, Peter said, to understand what he's becoming. The crocodile sniffed the air, though it had no nose. It laughed, a ghastly, rusted sound. She has the scent of the old one. Wendy stepped back. What are you talking about? The crocodile's gaze turned fully to her. Your mother came here once, the first Wendy, the one he chose first. Wendy's blood froze. Peter watched her carefully. You didn't know. I thought it was just a story. It was never just a story, Peter said. You inherited more than a name. The crocodile grinned wider. Your bait girl, Hook, wants you, and the boy here he's already cracked. Shall I finish breaking him? Peter drew his dagger. Try. But Wendy stepped between them. Tell me the truth, she demanded. Why did Hook come back? The crocodile's teeth closed, ticking, halting. It leaned down, impossibly slow. Because he found your mother's grave. Wendy swayed. And inside it, the beast added, was a clock that had never stopped. Peter stepped beside her. We have to go. The crocodile was sinking again. Tick-tock, Peter, it whispered. You're running out of her. They fled the basin. The ticking continued long after the crocodile vanished. Wendy didn't speak for miles. Peter finally broke the silence. He's after your time, Wendy, yours specifically. He believes if he consumes your memory, your origin, he can rewrite Neverland, remove me from it entirely. Erase you, she said. Or become me. She turned to him and realized he believed it. Chapter 7, Tinker Bell's Wrath. The hollow tree was not safe anymore. The lost boys were fracturing. The survivors of the ambush had returned changed, haunted, hesitant, and distrustful. Some refused to speak at all. Others whispered about shadows hiding in Peter's eyes or how Neverland's magic was listening now, watching. But no one spoke more venomously than Tinker Bell. Wendy awoke to find the camp under her glare. Tinker Bell stood atop a vine-covered stump, arms crossed, wings twitching erratically behind her like torn silk. Her glow had grown harsh, no longer golden but a sharp, furious white. It flickered in pulses, unstable. She doesn't belong here, Tink snapped, voice amplified by a glamour that made it crack like thunder. The lost boys stirred, eyes shifted to Wendy. Wendy pushed to her feet, heart beating calmly but heavily. If you have something to say, say it. Tinker Bell descended in a slow hover, her small frame taut with rage. She pointed a finger like a blade. You've poisoned him. No, Wendy said. You're just afraid he's not yours anymore. Tinker Bell shrieked, an inhuman keening sound. The trees shook. Nearby flowers wilted from the sheer force of it. Peter appeared from the shadows behind the camp, arms folded. Enough. Tinker Bell turned to him, wild-eyed. She'll be your death. Peter didn't move. She doesn't belong to Neverland. She doesn't belong to you, Tink hissed. She's not mine, Peter said. She's her own. The words hit harder than any blade. Tinker Bell reeled as though slapped. Her wings faltered. Her glow dimmed briefly. Then she erupted. Light exploded outward as she screamed. Magic flared, uncontrolled, primal. A nearby tree split down the center with a deafening crack. A wave of heat washed over the camp, igniting undergrowth. The lost boys scattered, ducking for cover. Tink's form expanded midair, growing taller, sharper. Her once petite body stretched into something far less human. Her arms lengthened, her eyes turned black, and her wings transformed into spidered membranes of radiant energy. A true fey form. Not the playful sprite of fairy tales, but a creature of ancient power, a thing born when fire still ruled the sky. She locked eyes on Wendy. "I gave him everything," she hissed, voice deeper now, fractured and echoing. "And you walk in with a name and a smile and think you matter." Wendy backed away. Peter stepped between them. "Tink." "I loved you," she roared. The admission turned the air brittle. Peter's voice dropped. "You still could have told me." "I tried, you never heard." Wendy didn't speak. She knew this moment wasn't hers, but Tinker Bell's eyes slid to her again, and what little compassion had glimmered there dissolved. "You're her daughter," Tink sneered. "The first Wendy's blood, you reek of her." Wendy's breath caught. "You want to know why Hook came back?" Tink spat. "Because she didn't love Peter either. Not really. He loved her and she left. And now her little ghost walks in thinking she can save him. You think you're better than your mother." "No," Wendy said. "I think I'm braver." Tinker Bell surged forward, but Peter caught her mid-lunge, wrapping her in a tight hold. Her limbs flailed, magic sparking from her skin. She shrieked, spat, twisted. "You don't want to do this," Peter growled. "I already have," she whispered. A burst of blinding light slammed outward. Peter was thrown back against the hollow tree, his body smashing through bark and bone. Tinker Bell turned to Wendy. Wendy raised her blade. But the strike never came. Tink stopped inches from her, breathing hard, glowing brighter. "I should kill you," she hissed. "But you won't," Wendy said. Silence. Tinker Bell's form shimmered again, fracturing, fatting. The monstrous glamour dropped, and the small, fragile fey girl hovered once more, eyes wet with something too hot to be tears. "I hate you," she whispered. Then she was gone, vanished in a blink of light and wings. Peter stumbled from the wreckage, blood in his mouth, hair matted with sap. "She's gone," he said hoarsely. "She's not coming back?" Wendy asked. Peter didn't answer. Instead, he looked out into the jungle, toward the east. "She'll go to Hook." Wendy's chest tightened. "To betray us." "To make me hurt," Peter said, "and she knows how." Later that night, Wendy sat at the edge of the hollow, watching the stars pulse overhead, Neverland's constellations warping again into strange, shifting sigils. Peter joined her. This time he kept his distance. "She loved you," Wendy said. "She loved what I used to be." "What did you used to be?" He didn't answer for a long time. "Then light, that's what they always say, that I was light, not good, not kind, just a spark, a fire without pain. And now," he looked at her, "now I burn." Far away in the Skull Fortress, Tinker Bell landed on a cracked dais. Hook sat waiting in a throne of twisted iron and shadow. He looked her over, smiled faintly. "You look terrible." "She's here," Tinker Bell said, "and he still loves her." Hook stood tall and monstrous in his armor. "Then we shall break her." Tinker Bell's wings dimmed. "He won't survive it," she whispered. Hook stepped down, his claw resting on her shoulder like a brand. "No," he said, "but you will." Chapter 8: The Feast of Forgetting. The invitation came at dawn. A raven, black-feathered, two-eyed, and wearing a chain of bones around its neck, descended into the hollow tree's clearing and croaked one word in a language no one spoke, but everyone understood. "Vista." Peter turned as pale as the sky. His voice dropped. "The island's calling." Kale spat into the dirt. No one answers that call anymore. But Peter stood. Wendy, watching from the edge of the hollow, folded her arms. What is it? Peter didn't look at her. A ritual, once a year. The island hosts a banquet. If you attend, it gives you what you hunger for most. Wendy blinked. And what's the catch? Peter's expression darkened. You forget something in return. Something small. Not always. That evening, they followed the raven. Across woven bridges made of thorned vines and over glass-like rivers that whispered the names of the dead. The terrain warped the deeper they went, time bending with it. The sun never rose in Neverland, but the horizon behind them glowed with an unnatural blush, while ahead the sky was pitch black and full of roving stars. At the summit of a hill shaped like a spiral shell stood a massive structure made from bone, coral, and living bark. It throbbed faintly, as if breathing. The lost boys flanked Peter in silence. None of them joked, none of them smiled. Wendy walked beside Kale. Why do they go? Because hope dies last, he said. The interior. It was enormous. Long tables stretched into shadows. A canopy of vines and bones hung above, strung with glowing lanterns made from skulls. The feast was already laid out. Fruits that shimmered like gemstones, meats that steamed with magic, pastries that pulsed as if alive. The smell was intoxicating. Peter didn't eat. He sat at the head of the table, unmoving, watching. Kale sat across from Wendy, but avoided the food. Other lost boys indulged. One tore into a peach the size of his head and immediately forgot his name. He laughed, overjoyed. Another girl, lanky, sunken-eyed, barely 18, bit into a silver apple and the scar on her face faded. She wept. Wendy stared at the plate before her, a still-beating heart surrounded by glistening berries. It smelled like memories, like nursery rhymes, like her mother's perfume. I won't eat it, she said. A voice beside her cooed, but you already want to. She turned. A figure in white stood just behind her. Not a lost boy. Not a fae. A memory witch. Her face was featureless, just lips red and smiling. This island takes, darling, the witch whispered. Why not choose what it takes? Wendy stood. Get away from me. The witch didn't follow, just tilted her head. Careful child, you reek of mother love and martyrdom. That scent draws hook like rot draws worms. Peter's chair scraped behind her. He had risen. The witch bowed mockingly. She'll taste sweeter than the first, won't she, Pan? Peter's eyes burned green. The witch evaporated into mist. After the feast, the tables emptied. The lost boys who had eaten stumbled through the exit like drunkards. Some sang, some cried, some stared into nothing. Kale sat with his head down. I didn't eat, he murmured. Peter walked toward Wendy slowly. His gaze was heavy with things unsaid. You passed the test, he said. It was a test, she asked. He nodded. Everything here is. Wendy glanced back at the hall. They gave up pieces of themselves and got comfort in return. She clenched her fists. That's not living. It's surviving, he said, the way some of us have to. Peter turned toward the jungle. There's one more thing you need to see. The pool of unmemory. Peter led her to a hidden grove, circular, lined with statues of screaming children and weeping trees. At its center was a pool that didn't reflect light. This is where the island stores what's taken, Peter said. Wendy approached the edge. Inside, visions. A girl herself, younger, laughing. A woman's hand brushing her hair. A lullaby sung off-key in a familiar voice. Her mother. I've never seen that memory, she whispered. Peter nodded. You were meant to, but the island took it, passed it to the crocodile to feed it. She turned to him, breath catching. Why me? Peter looked away. I don't know yet. But Hook does, she said. Peter's jaw tightened. Yes, he whispered, and that's why he's winning. Far away, the Skull Fortress. Tinker Bell stood in Hook's private chamber, surrounded by ticking clocks and maps made of human skin. Hook watched the pool before him, an enchanted basin of belladonna and blood. Inside it, Wendy at the pool of unmemory. She's stronger than the first, he said. She's not in love with him, Tinker Bell said coldly. Hook grinned. Not yet, but she will be. And when she is, Tink asked. Hook turned to her slowly, his eyes glinting. Then she'll give him everything. Chapter 9, Pan's Other Face. The hollow tree had grown quiet. Peter hadn't returned since the feast. The lost boys whispered among themselves, casting furtive glances into the dark corners of the glade, as if afraid their thoughts could summon something worse than monsters. Cale pulled Wendy aside near the edge of camp, where the vines grew twisted and sharp. He's been gone too long. Wendy's arms were crossed. You think he's with her? Cale shook his head. No, I think he's with himself. She blinked. What does that mean? The shadow, it's not just a piece of him, it's becoming him. Wendy frowned. You've seen this happen before. I've seen boys become things that weren't boys anymore. She exhaled sharply and turned toward the twisted forest ahead. Then we're going after him. 2 hours later. They tracked him east, past the River of Names, past the broken stone heads carved into the cliff face, deeper into Neverland's wild, forbidden zone, the unhallowed thicket. The trees there grew backward, their roots tangled in the sky, their branches burrowed into the ground. The air was heavy with silence. Wendy felt it before she heard it. A presence, like something watching from inside her own bones. They emerged into a hollow wrapped in ivy black and lit by a flickering fire in the center. Shadows danced on the bark like echoes of people long gone. Peter sat by the flame. Or rather, a version of Peter. His face was pale, too pale. His shirt was torn. His left eye glowed faintly. And beside him, leaning against a log, was his shadow. Separate whole, grinning. Wendy stopped at the edge of the firelight. Peter looked up slowly. You shouldn't be here. You left, she said. You're hiding from them. I'm hiding from me, he said softly. The shadow stood and moved around the flame. Its face was Peter's, but darker, eyes rimmed with pitch, lips too wide, voice echoing like it came from inside a cave. She's seen too much, it said. We should end it now. Peter didn't look at it. She's the only one who sees clearly. Wendy stepped forward. I need to know what you are. Peter finally met her gaze. I'm not a boy anymore. Haven't been for a long time. Neverland doesn't let me age, but it doesn't let me stay the same either. Every choice I don't make, every feeling I bury, the island keeps it, and gestured to the shadow is the cost. The shadow grinned wider. I am his hunger, his rage, his jealousy, the part of him that remembers how good it felt to never care. Wendy whispered, You used to be innocent. Peter nodded. Once, before I lost the first boy, before I let Hook survive, before I brought her here. Wendy frowned. Who? Peter's voice cracked. Your mother. The world tilted. She was the first Wendy, he said. The first girl I brought, she taught me how to care. And then she left, and I let her, but Neverland didn't, it kept her. The shadow snickered, buried her in the soil, fed her to the roots, planted her deep. Wendy backed away. What are you saying? Peter stood, trembling. You're here because of her, because you were drawn to the gap she left. Hook found her grave, found what she took with her, and now he thinks he can use you to finish what she started. And what was that? Peter stepped close. To break the island. Flashback Neverland, years ago. She was older than the stories said. Beautiful, yes, but sharp, cynical. She didn't want fairy tale-ies, she wanted freedom. She loved Peter for a while, but she saw the cracks, saw that Neverland wasn't paradise. It was a prison. She tried to kill the shadow. She failed. She tried to leave with the lost boys. The island stopped her. Peter buried what was left of her beneath the singing tree and tried to forget. Now, Wendy's hands trembled. You lied. Peter shook his head. I withheld. It was never supposed to repeat. But you let it, she hissed. You brought me. You wrote the stories, Peter said. You called me. Wendy's vision blurred. I thought you were a myth, a fantasy. I am, he said, and fantasies rot. Suddenly the shadow moved, faster than wind. It lunged for Wendy. Peter tackled it midair. The two versions of him slammed into the ground, writhing, one screaming, the other laughing. They fought like reflections caught in a shattered mirror, mirroring, contradicting, impossible to follow. Cale pulled Wendy back. We have to go, he whispered. No, she said, I'm done running. She stepped toward the fire and spoke in a calm, commanding voice. Peter. Both figures froze. Look at me, she said. The one underneath, the real Peter, turned, blood in his mouth, pain in his eyes. You are not him, she said. The shadow hissed. You are not nothing, she continued. You are not a ghost, not a god. You chose to feel, that's what made you Pan. Peter breathed hard. The shadow trembled. Then, he reached into his own chest and pulled. A strand of shadow, thick and dripping, emerged in his fist. It screamed. The shadow tried to resist. But Peter stood and fed it into the fire. The flame exploded. The shadow burned, screeching, twisting, finally consumed. And Peter collapsed. Later, he awoke in Wendy's lap. The sky above was dark, but for the first time in Neverland it was clear. Stars hung in silence. I'm sorry, he said. Wendy brushed a leaf from his hair. Don't be sorry, be better. He smiled faintly. I'll try. They sat in silence. But far in the distance, deep in the Skull Fortress, Hook felt the shadow die. And he knew what that meant. Peter was whole again. And now the war would truly begin. Chapter 10, The Labyrinth Tree. There were places even Peter feared. One of them stood just beyond the eastern glade, where the soil turned white and the trees grew in spiral formations. It was a place no lost boy wandered alone. A place older than Peter, older than Hook, older than time itself. The Labyrinth Tree. Before dawn, Peter stood at the edge of the clearing, arms crossed, eyes locked on a massive trunk that spiraled into the clouds like a cyclone carved from bark and bone. Wendy joined him, her fingers still sore from the night before. The shadow was gone, but the tension in Peter's shoulders hadn't eased. This is where it started, he said softly. Your story, she asked. He shook his head. The island. The labyrinth tree was colossal, its base wide enough to house a city. Its bark pulsed faintly. Carvings twisted along its skin. Symbols in languages long dead, faces stretched into agony, wings folded in silence. The entrance yawned before them, a vertical slit in the bark, dripping golden sap. Wendy took a step forward. We're going in. Peter nodded. If we want to understand what Hook's planning, we need to see what he saw, what your mother saw. Cale joined them, weapons strapped, eyes hollow. It's not too late to turn around. Yes, it is, Wendy said. They entered. Inside the tree. There was no ceiling. Only winding tunnels of thick wood and luminous veins that pulsed with breath. The air was humid and filled with faint whispers. Wendy walked beside Peter, her hand trailing the bark. This place feels alive. It is, Peter said. Every year it grows deeper. Every boy who dies here, his bones feed it. Every memory forgotten becomes its root. They passed through a narrow corridor where the walls closed in. Faces bulged from the wood, eyes closed, mouths agape. Cale muttered, "Are those?" Peter's face was grim. Lost boys who tried to steal from the tree. "What did they try to steal?" Wendy asked. Peter whispered, "Truth." They emerged into a vast chamber where the ceiling was lost to darkness. In the center stood an altar of petrified feathers and stone teeth. Floating above it, a crystal prism, slowly spinning, casting reflections of impossible scenes on the walls. Visions. One showed a young woman, Wendy's mother, standing beside Peter, touching the altar. Another showed Hook as a boy, tears in his eyes, looking up at the same crystal, then his hand reaching for it, then breaking it. Peter's voice trembled. This is where he first changed, where he saw what he would become. Wendy approached the crystal. "What does it do?" "It reveals," Peter said, "everything past, future, self." Cale backed away. "We shouldn't touch it." But Wendy was already stepping forward. She placed a hand against the prism. The vision. She stood in a garden under a golden sky. Birds sang. A woman sat beneath a tree, elegant, sharp-eyed, older than Wendy remembered but unmistakable. Her mother. "Hello, darling," the woman said without looking up. Tears flooded Wendy's eyes. "How?" "I left something for you," her mother said. "In the earth, in the roots, a story they couldn't burn." "Why?" Wendy asked. "Because one day, you'd have to finish it." Wendy stepped forward. "Finish what?" Her mother finally looked at her, breaking the chain. She snapped back. Peter caught her before she fell. "I saw her," Wendy gasped. "She knew she wanted me here." Peter swallowed hard. "Then she's more powerful in death than we thought." Suddenly, the tree shuddered. Cale spun, blade drawn. "What was that?" Peter's expression darkened. "Hook knows we're here." A wall peeled open behind them, revealing a spiral staircase descending into black. Wendy didn't hesitate. She started down. The roots. It was colder here. The walls changed from bark to stone to ash to bone. Wendy's breath fogged in the air. The light grew dimmer. And then they reached it. A vault beneath the roots, walls etched with a single repeating symbol, a hook piercing an eye. At the center of the room lay a broken throne, and on it a body. Not a corpse, not decayed. Preserved. Her mother. Wendy dropped to her knees. Peter knelt beside her. The island didn't kill her, it kept her. "For what?" Wendy asked. A new voice answered. "For me." They turned. Hook stood in the archway. No longer in armor, barefoot, robed in shadows, his skin pale as bone, his eyes pitch black. He raised his hand. The vault shook. Peter stepped forward. "Stay back." Hook's voice was calm, almost tender. "I've waited so long for this moment. You, her, the girl who was born from a ghost. You're mine, Wendy." "You're not taking her," Peter growled. Hook grinned. "I don't need to take her, I just need her to remember." And then he snapped his fingers. The prism above shattered. Wendy screamed. Memory exploded. Visions poured into her skull, her mother dying, Peter weeping, Hook becoming, the shadow splitting, the island bleeding. The roots quaked. Peter grabbed her arm. "Wendy, stay with me." But she fell into the roots, into light, into darkness. Wendy dreamed of clocks, of wings, of blood. And somewhere deep in the island's heart, something woke up. Chapter 11, Echoes of the Nursery. Wendy awoke not in the vault, but in a bed. A familiar one. The mattress was firm beneath her. The linen smelled of lavender. The ceiling above her was cracked, plaster curling like dead skin. She sat up slowly. A small nightlight hummed in the corner. A rocking horse stood in the shadows, unmoving. Shelves of old toys lined the walls, dustless, pristine. Her books were stacked neatly, alphabetized. Everything in the room was frozen in time. the room she had slept in as a child. The nursery. But it wasn't right. The wallpaper was the wrong color. The window overlooked a moonless void. The rocking horse was breathing. "Where am I?" she whispered. A voice answered from the corner, warm and familiar. "Home, dear." She turned. Her mother sat in the chair by the window, bathed in pale gray light. Her smile was gentle, her hair braided, her hands folded calmly in her lap. Wendy's voice cracked, "You're not real." Her mother tilted her head. "I'm real enough for you to believe." Wendy stepped back. The room trembled faintly like a held breath. "You're dead." "Yes." "This isn't real." Her mother stood. "And yet your heart is beating faster." Wendy clenched her fists. "Why are you here?" The lights dimmed. "To remind you," her mother said, "what you were, what you left behind." The door creaked open. Laughter echoed through the hall. Her brothers, John and Michael. Tiny voices. The clatter of wooden swords. The call of imaginary pirates. But she didn't run to them. Because she understood now. This place was not a memory. It was a trap. Elsewhere in the real world of Neverland, Peter carried Wendy's unconscious body through the bleeding tunnels of the labyrinth tree, his jaw clenched, steps purposeful. The vault had collapsed behind them. Hook had vanished into the roots. Cale limped beside him, his shoulder bleeding. "What's happening to her?" "She's caught in the prism's wake," Peter said. "The shattering fractured her memories. She's stuck somewhere between past and present." "Can you bring her back?" "I don't know," Peter admitted, "but I'm going to try." Back in the nursery, the window opened with no sound. A windless breeze spilled in, thick with ash. Her mother's eyes were no longer brown. They were mirrors, reflecting Wendy's face, older, colder, frightened. "She left you," the mirror mother said. "No." She abandoned Peter. She let Neverland rot. She fell in love with something else, something mortal, something real. Wendy's voice shook. She tried to save it. She failed. The walls pulsed, the shelves cracked, the room grew. And from the corner, the rocking horse unfolded into a man-shaped shadow with eyes like lanterns and a grin made of ticking teeth. Hook. But not him, a memory of him, younger, gentler. He knelt beside her like a father kneeling to a child. "Do you know what I was before the hook?" he whispered. "A boy, just a boy." "I know," Wendy said. "I didn't want power, I wanted freedom. You wanted to live forever. I wanted to match her." The memory hook stood and pulled back the curtains. Outside, the sky boiled. "And she took that from me." Wendy stared him down. "My mother didn't take anything. She gave Peter her love," he hissed, "and left me with the darkness." The mirror mother put a hand on Wendy's shoulder. "You don't have to remember her this way. We can change it. We can rewrite the past." "Rewrite the truth?" Wendy asked. "Yes," the mother whispered. "We can make you happy." Wendy's fists clenched. "I don't want happy. I want real." She reached out and gripped the mirror's edge. The reflection shattered. The room collapsed. Back in Neverland, Wendy gasped and sat up violently, eyes wide, breath ragged. Peter held her, steadying her. "You're back." She stared at him. He showed me, her, our home, my past, and himself before. "What did you learn?" Peter asked. "That hook, not trying to destroy Neverland." Peter frowned. "What then?" "He's trying to rebuild it." Peter's jaw tightened. "From what?" Wendy stood shakily, her strength returning. "From our pain." Later that night, she stood at the edge of the hollow tree, staring at the dark sky. Peter joined her. "I saw her," Wendy said. "She told me I had to finish the story." Peter said nothing for a while. Then, "Do you know what happens when stories end?" Wendy looked at him. "They become true." Peter's eyes glinted. with something between hope and fear. "I don't want to lose you," he said. "You won't." He looked away. Everyone does. Wendy touched his hand. "Not this time." Far in the distance, within the throne of the Skull Fortress, Hook stood at a table of broken clocks and broken boys, smiling. "She's almost ready," he said. Tinker Bell sat nearby, quiet, watching Wendy's image burn across a scrying pool. "She's stronger than her mother," the Fae whispered. Hook nodded. "She'll break better." Chapter 12: The Hooked Man. The wind over Skull Rock howled like a dying god. The fortress built within the split skull of a long-dead leviathan rose high above Neverland's Black Sea. Its towers were jagged, its gates rusted red. The structure pulsed faintly, alive with stolen time, fed by despair. No light touched it that was not summoned by fire or scream. Wendy had never been this close to it before. She stood at the edge of a cliff, cloaked in shadows, beside Peter and Kale. Below them, a narrow causeway of bleached bone connected the cliff to the fortress gate. There were no guards, just a single door carved with a hook and a crown. "He wants us to come," Kale said. Peter nodded. "He's waited too long to keep hiding." Wendy narrowed her eyes. "Then we give him what he wants." Inside the fortress, they entered. The interior was a twisting maze of bone and iron. The walls bled memory, echoes flickering across the stone like ghosts. A lost boy screaming, Tinker Bell weeping, a young girl singing nursery rhymes while fire consumed her hair. Wendy moved toward the central corridor. Her heart pounded with each step, not from fear, but from certainty. Hook was here, waiting. The throne room. It wasn't what she expected. The great chamber was simple: stone, flame, darkness. A single throne crafted from warped wood, and the ribs of a drowned whale sat in the center. No guards, no monsters, just Hook. He stood beside the throne, not seated but looming, back turned, staring into a mirror made of obsidian. He wore no armor now, just a long coat stitched with feathers and seams of shadow. His claw hand pulsed with faint light. His hair had turned white. His eyes were dark, sunken, too calm. Wendy stepped forward alone. "Hook didn't move. You came. You called." He turned, and Wendy froze. Because beneath the shadow, beneath the scars and madness, he looked familiar. Not in face, in presence. "Do you know who I was before the hook?" he asked. "I've seen it," Wendy said. He nodded. "But you haven't felt it." Hook stepped down from the dais, the claw clinking softly on stone. He stood close, close enough that Wendy could see the seam in his neck where time itself had tried to tear him apart. "I was his friend," he said. Wendy blinked. "Peter." "His first," Hook whispered. "His best. I was the first boy who followed him into Neverland. I believed in him. I gave up everything." Peter stepped forward now, face taut. "James." Hook's voice was a growl. "Don't say my name. You lost the right when you let the island eat me. I tried to save you. You tried to forget me." The room trembled. Wendy looked between them. "You loved him." Hook's eyes burned. "We were more than brothers. I followed him because I thought he could change the world." Peter's voice cracked. "We were children, James. We didn't understand." "No," Hook snapped. "You didn't understand. I did. And when I grew, when I questioned you, you turned from me. You let the island choose between us." Silence. Wendy stepped forward. "That's why you hate him." Hook smiled. "No, dear Wendy, I hate him because he won." Flashback ages ago. Two boys, one named Peter, one named James. They built Neverland together in the early hours of imagination and stormlight. James shaped the cliffs, Peter called the birds. They ruled as one. Until James asked what came after childhood. And the island answered with silence. Then with punishment. Now, Wendy stared at Hook. Why bring me here? He reached into his coat and drew out a silver locket. She gasped. Her mother. He opened it. Inside, a torn picture, a younger Peter, a younger James, and a child between them. I knew her before you were born, Hook said. She came to me after she left him. She chose me. Peter froze. She didn't, he whispered. Hook's voice rose. She saw the rot in you, Pan. She saw what Neverland made of you. She tried to save me, tried to break the cycle, and you let the island devour her. Wendy shook her head. She died protecting me. She died because of him, Hook roared. Peter drew his dagger. Enough. Hook raised his claw, and the room shattered. The throne exploded into splinters. Chains whipped from the walls, striking like snakes. Kale was thrown into the air, pinned against bone. And Wendy, frozen, stared as Hook's form changed. No longer just a man. His body lengthened, his teeth sharpened, his face blurred, became something between shadow and flesh. His claw twisted and grew. He had become the Hooked Man, fused with the island's oldest magic, a god of grief, a beast of memory. He charged Peter. They clashed. Steel screamed, magic flared. The chamber pulsed with light and shadow. Hook was faster now, darker, less bound by form. Peter fought with fury, but he bled from wounds that wouldn't heal. Wendy tried to move, tried to reach them, but the air had thickened into syrup. Her feet wouldn't lift. And then Hook turned to her. Join me, he whispered. End the cycle, burn the fairy tale. She didn't speak. Instead, she stepped forward, lifted her mother's locket and held it high. The locket blazed with light. Hook screamed. His body warped, screeching, splitting. Peter lunged and drove his dagger into the Hooked Man's chest. Silence. Then, a roar. Not of death, but rebirth. Hook fell, but he didn't vanish. He collapsed in human form, bleeding, breathing. Peter stood above him. This isn't over, Hook rasped. Peter looked at Wendy. Wendy said no, but it's finally changing. Chapter 13, The Bone Orchard. The walk back was quiet. Wendy, Kale, and Peter carried the weight of the battle in their bodies and in their silence. Hook hadn't died. That was the worst part. He bled, he gasped, but even broken, he smiled. And they all knew what that meant. He was still waiting for something, still holding back. They returned to the hollow tree, but the lost boys were gone. Scattered, vanished. Only one message was left, carved into the bark of a fallen trunk. The bones are calling. Peter paled. We have to go. Hours later, the Bone Orchard. They approached at dusk, though Neverland's sky no longer obeyed logic. The horizon burned purple. Shadows moved where there were no figures, and the bones, they had multiplied. The once narrow path through femurs and ribs had grown into a city of graves. The trees here stood in silent witness, their bark split by roots shaped like ribs. The air smelled of iron and old magic. Peter led the way, a blade in one hand, his knuckles white. Wendy walked beside him, her locket tucked safely beneath her shirt. Kale took rear guard, eyes darting like a hunted thing. They passed memorials now, moss-covered headstones engraved not with names but moments. The boy who stopped laughing. The girl who saw the stars move backward. He who forgot himself. They reached the center of the orchard, where the altar stood. It had changed. The twisted iron slab was now encircled by new totems, spears, bone-carved masks, and glowing stones. Around them, the lost boys stood in a perfect ring, silent, expressionless. Each had a shard of belladonna crystal embedded in their chest. Peter froze. No. Wendy stepped closer. What happened to them? Kale knelt beside one boy, eyes open, lips parted slightly. He's breathing. They all are, Peter said, but they're not in there. A slow clap echoed from the trees, and from the shadows stepped Tinker Bell. She had changed again. Taller now, eyes glowing faint green. Her wings had become jagged, crystalline spines. She floated above the ground like a god carved from spite and stardust. "Did you really think Hook was the only one who changed?" she asked. Peter stared. "Tink." "Don't," she hissed. Wendy stepped forward. "You brought them here." "I freed them," Tinker Bell said, her voice layered with unearthly resonance. "From the pain, from the waiting, from you." "They're not free," Peter said. "They're hollow." "They're peaceful," she snapped. Wendy narrowed her eyes. "You're working with him now." "No," Tink said, hovering down to eye level. "He was just the first to understand, the only one who saw what needed to happen." She gestured to the orchard. "Neverland is sick, Wendy, sick with memory, with longing. Every child who stays gets twisted. Every adult who returns is devoured. This island needs a reset." Peter whispered, "You're going to burn it." Tink nodded, "And from its ashes build something better." Kale raised his sword. "You'll kill them." "They're already dead," she said. "No," Wendy said firmly. "They're not, and you know that." Tinker Bell's face twisted with rage. "Why do you care? You don't belong here, you never did." "Because I do belong," Wendy said. "My mother gave her life for this place, not to erase it, to heal it." Tink screamed and the ground cracked. The bone orchard trembled. The altar split open like a maw, and from beneath it, a massive pulse of magic rippled outward, knocking Peter and Kale to the ground. Wendy remained standing. "Tinker Bell," she said softly, "you loved him." Tink blinked. "You still do." "No." "Yes," Wendy said, "and this isn't what she would have wanted." Tinker Bell's breath caught. "What she wanted," Tink spat. "She abandoned him. She left Peter with me and never came back. I waited for decades. I begged for a piece of him. She had everything." "You could still have part of him," Wendy said, stepping closer. Tink's wings faltered. "I see you," Wendy whispered. "You're not a monster. You're someone who stayed when no one else did." Peter pushed himself to his feet, bleeding from the forehead. "Tink, please." Her glow dimmed. And then she screamed. Not in fury. In heartbreak. The crystals in the lost boys' chests cracked, one by one, shattering like glass. Each boy collapsed, gasping, clutching his head as memory poured back in. The altar melted. The wind stopped. And Tinker Bell dropped to the ground. Wendy caught her before she hit the dirt. Tink wept. "I'm tired," she whispered. "I just wanted him to see me." "I see you," Wendy said gently. Peter stepped forward. He knelt beside them. For the first time in this story, he looked small. He took Tinker Bell's hand. "I'm sorry," he said. She closed her eyes and vanished. Not in death. In release. A final shimmer of light drifted into the sky and was gone. Later, they sat in silence among the broken stones. The lost boys began to stir, slowly blinking, some weeping, others empty. Peter leaned against the altar's ruin. "I should have stopped this long ago." Wendy stared up at the stars. "You couldn't, you weren't whole." Peter looked at her, and now. She looked back. "Now we all are." But far to the north, above the boiling sea, Hook stood on the Skull Fortress's highest tower. His body healed, his eye burning. "The girl," he said softly, "she thinks the bones will save her." He smiled. "The bones are just the beginning." Chapter 14, Flightless. The wind over the hollow tree was still. Not dead. Not calm. Just missing. Wendy noticed it first, how the branches no longer swayed, how the air refused to shift no matter how high they climbed. Even the sky looked wrong, a dull smear of colorless gray, like the moment before a painting fades. Peter stood on the highest branch, eyes scanning the canopy. Cale watched from below, whispering, "He hasn't flown since the Bone Orchard." Wendy joined Peter. "You haven't left the ground," she said softly. Peter didn't answer. He crouched on the branch, the windless silence wrapping around him like wet linen. She studied his profile. He looked older somehow, drawn, sharper, not physically but spiritually. The loss of Tinker Bell had left something in him broken or maybe exposed. "Try," she said. He closed his eyes. The wind should have come. The wings, his shadow-born magicrot wings, should have unfolded. They didn't. Peter stepped off the branch. He dropped. Wendy gasped, but he twisted midair, grabbed a vine, and swung into a roll across the ground below. Cale ran toward him. "You okay?" Peter stood slowly, rubbing his shoulder. "Fine." "No, you're not," Wendy said. Peter looked up at her. "The island's cutting me off." Cale's voice dropped. "Hook doing?" Peter nodded. "He's binding the sky." Later, inside the hollow tree, they gathered in the war room. The lost boys who'd returned, those who still remembered their names, were quiet. They sat in circles, cleaning weapons, sharing bread, sharpening blades. Their eyes held a new clarity and exhaustion. Peter stood before them with a map drawn in glowing ink across the floor. The outline of Neverland, shifting slowly as the island warped beneath their feet. "He's turned the sky into a net," Peter explained. "Magic can't flow freely. No one can fly, not me, not the fair folk, not even the crows." "How?" someone asked. Peter pointed to a new symbol drawn into the map's center. A spire ringed in circles, a sun wrapped in chains. Wendy knelt beside it. "What is that?" Cale muttered, "It wasn't there yesterday." Peter looked grim. "It's called the Anchor Tower. He's building it from time itself." The room went silent. "That's where the belladonna flows now," Peter said. "Where he draws his power and where the sky is dying." Wendy stood. "Then we destroy it." Peter's lips twitched. "You make it sound simple." Wendy shrugged. "We've fought monsters, shadows, memories. A tower's just bricks." "A tower fed by grief and enchanted by the screams of the lost," Cale said. She smiled faintly. "So a very loud tower." That night, Wendy couldn't sleep. She stepped outside the hollow tree and looked up. The stars no longer shimmered. They flickered, unsteady, flickering like dying candles behind glass. Peter joined her, barefoot, quiet. "I was supposed to protect this place," he said. "Instead, I let it turn me into something it needed." "You were a child," Wendy said. "So was Hook. He became a monster." Peter looked at her. "And you think I haven't?" She turned to him. "You still care, that's the difference." They stood in silence. Then she asked the question that had haunted her for days. "What would happen if you left?" Peter blinked. "Left Neverland?" She nodded. He hesitated. "I would die." Wendy paled. "Why?" "I am Neverland," he said, "or what's left of its innocence. If I go, the island collapses." She stared at him. "But it's already collapsing." Peter looked down. "Maybe that's the point." Elsewhere, the Anchor Tower. Hook stood atop the spire. It pierced the sky like a knife through glass, built from clockwork gears, dead feathers, and the bones of children who had forgotten their names. Around him, his new army stirred, constructs made of memory and loss, animated by belladonna magic. They marched without voice, without soul. Tinker Bell's final tears had been collected, distilled. Now they powered the tower's heart. Hook raised his claw. Light shimmered from the tower's core. The sky groaned. A winged creature high above fell dead mid-flight, its magic gone. Hook smiled. "Let him walk," he whispered. "Let him crawl, let him feel gravity's kiss." He turned to the altar behind him. where a new locket lay. Wendy. Back at the hollow tree, Peter stood atop the highest branch once more. He opened his arms. No wings came. No wind rose. He stepped off, and this time he fell. Wendy watched him land hard. She rushed forward, kneeling beside him. He laughed softly, bitterly. "I can't fly anymore." Wendy placed her hand over his chest. "Then we'll walk," she said, "together." Chapter 15. Tinker Bell's Betrayal. There are two kinds of silence in Neverland. The kind that comes before a storm, and the kind that comes after something beautiful breaks. Tonight was the second kind. Elsewhere, the forgotten veil. The veil was hidden behind a curtain of willow light and ash trees that wept molten leaves. It wasn't on any map, not even Peter's. This was where Tinker Bell had gone to die. Or so they had thought. But Tink had not died. She had changed. Her new body was thinner, more spectral than physical, a fusion of fatting starlight and cracked obsidian. She floated between worlds now, neither in Neverland nor beyond it. Her wings, long since shattered by rage, had become trailing veils of dust and memory. She was no longer bound by the island's laws. She had freed herself by betraying the boy she loved. But that freedom cost more than she thought. And Hook, of course, had known it would. Days earlier, the Skull Fortress. When she gave him her tears, Hook had touched her face, not as a monster but as something worse. A man who believed he was owed her. "You'll be remembered," he said, as the one who ended him. Tinker Bell had smiled, a perfect bitter smile, and handed over the last thing she had, a memory of Peter laughing, not forced, not broken, pure. The moment she gave it to Hook, she felt it leave her. Now she couldn't remember why she'd loved him in the first place. And that was the betrayal. Not of Peter, but of herself. Now the hollow tree. Wendy was the first to see her. She stepped from the perimeter of the veil, glowing faintly, her eyes dim but clear. Cale raised his weapon. "Don't." Peter stepped forward, breath shallow. "Tink." She looked at him. "It's me." "No," he said softly. "You feel different." "I am." She floated closer. "But I'm still what matters." Wendy's eyes narrowed. "What do you want?" Tink hovered just above the ground, looking at Wendy like a flame looks at paper. "I want to fix what I broke." The campfire meeting. That night she sat with them around the fire. The lost boys wary, Peter quiet, Wendy unreadable. Tink told them everything. How Hook had twisted her grief, how he had weaponized it, how she had willingly given him pieces of herself because the pain of being unseen had become unbearable. "I betrayed him," she said, not looking at Peter, "but not because I hated him." Peter whispered, "Because you loved me." She nodded once. Silence. "Then he's using the tower to compress time. The sky is already falling. When it breaks fully, the island will reboot. He'll rebuild it with himself at the center." "And us?" Wendy asked. "Gone," Tink said, "even your memories." Wendy turned to Peter. "We don't have long." "No," he agreed, "but we have her." Tink looked surprised. Peter looked at her. "You're not forgiven, not yet, but you can help." She blinked, then nodded. "I already started." Elsewhere, the anchor tower. Hook stood before the heart of the tower, a core of spinning glass rings infused with belladonna and raw grief. Around it, hundreds of captured memories pulsed like lanterns, each one a story, a soul, a life. Tink's memory of Peter laughing shone the brightest. He touched it gently, and the sky cracked. A hairline fracture spread across the heavens. "Soon," Hook said, "so soon." But as he turned to leave, one of the memory lanterns flickered. Then another. Then 5. Hook stopped. The entire tower groaned. The memories were bleeding out. Back at the hollow tree, Tinker Bell stood atop the tallest branch, arms wide, eyes glowing. Wendy and Peter watched from below. "She's pulling the memories back," Peter whispered. Cale looked up in awe. "She's unbinding the tower." But it was killing her. Tink's body flickered. Her form wavered like flame in a storm. Wendy shouted, "Tink, stop." "I can't," she said, voice soft. "This is what I was meant for." "No," Peter called. "You're more than magic, you're." "I'm the one who stayed," she whispered. And with that, Tinker Bell shattered. Not violently, not in pain, like starlight drifting into wind. The sky brightened. The stars pulsed. And Peter fell to his knees. Later that night, Wendy sat beside him. "She came back," she said. Peter nodded. "She always did." "She saved you." "No," Peter said. "She saved Neverland." They looked up at the sky. The crack was still there, but it had slowed. And now the wind was returning. Far away, Hook's tower. He watched the damage in silence. Half the memories gone. Half the sky refusing to break. He stepped back, cloaked in fury and shadow. "Tinker Bell," he whispered, "you traitor." But then he smiled again. "No matter, the girl still breathes, and she has everything I need." Chapter 16. The Shadow Splits. The stars over Neverland had begun to flicker with intent. Not just fading, not just burning out. Blinking, watching. Midnight, the hollow tree. Peter stood beneath the roots, his face half-lit by the dying embers of a fire he couldn't feel. Wendy approached quietly. "You haven't spoken since she..." "Don't," Peter said. Wendy sat anyway, arms wrapped around her knees. "She mattered," she said. Peter nodded. "Too much." Cale entered from the outer rim of the hollow, movement at the northern ridge. Peter looked up sharply. "What kind?" "Shadows fast, wrong." They didn't wait. An hour later, the ridge. It was worse than they expected. 12 lost boys, torn apart, not by claws, not by weapons, by mirrors. Wendy knelt beside one still breathing. His lips moved without sound. She leaned in and heard only one word, "Pan." She looked at Peter. He was already shaking. "No," he whispered. "No, I buried it, I killed it." Wendy stood. "Killed what?" But Peter didn't answer. Because a voice, his own, spoke from the trees. "Hello, Wendy." She turned and gasped. Peter Pan stood before her. Another one. Same face, same eyes. But wrong. Colder, cleaner, cruel. He smiled. "Miss me." The shadow. It had returned, fully split, fully whole. It no longer mimicked Peter. It wore him perfectly. Peter staggered back. "You're gone, I burned you." "You burned part of me," the shadow said, "but not the part you left behind." Wendy stepped in front of Peter. "What do you want?" The shadow grinned. "What I always wanted, to be free." From the tree line, dozens of others emerged. Shadows, wearing lost boys' faces. Twisted, hollow, grinning. Peter drew his dagger. "This isn't happening." "Oh, it is," the shadow said, "because Hook isn't the only one rewriting the story. I'm writing mine now." And with that, he lunged. The battle. It was chaos. Steel clashing with void, magic exploding from severed memory. Wendy fought beside Peter, slashing, screaming, surviving. Cale was thrown back by a wave of screaming laughter, 3 shadows wearing his brother's face. Peter met his double blade to blade. "You're just a wound," he snarled. "I'm what you refuse to feel," the shadow said. "All that anger, all that need." Their knives met again. Peter was slower, the shadow unrelenting. Wendy turned, saw Cale bleeding, cornered. The shadow raised a blade. and Peter too far couldn't fly. He screamed, "Wendy, no." She ran, not away, toward, and plunged her dagger into the shadow's back. It didn't die. It split further, 2 forms emerging, then 3. Each fragment with Peter's eyes. Each one whispering, "You never grew up. You let them die. You knighted me." Peter collapsed. The magic in his chest flared. The air warped. And then, everything froze. The dreaming plane. Peter floated in a white void. Before him, the shadow, the real one. But smaller now, thinner, fragile. Peter stepped forward. "This ends." The shadow whispered, "You need me." Peter shook his head. "I needed you when I couldn't face myself." "Then face it now," the shadow hissed. "Face what you did." Peter paused. And then, he knelt. "I let them die," he said. "I let her leave. I let Hook fall. And I stayed because it was easier than growing up." The shadow shivered. "And now?" it asked. Peter stood. "Now I carry it." He stepped forward and placed a hand on the shadow's chest and pulled it into himself. Back in the real world, Peter awoke screaming. Wendy caught him. The shadow's gone, dissipated like smoke in reverse. The forest silent again. Peter's eyes shimmered. He looked at her, breathing hard. "I'm whole." She nodded. "But that means—" "Yes," Wendy said. "The next part of the story is the hardest one." Peter stood. Cale limped over, alive, bloody. Wendy looked at both of them. "Let's end this." Far above the anchor tower, Hook stared at a scrying mirror, fury burning. She made him whole. A figure stepped from the shadows. Slender, cloaked female. A new ally. Hook turned. "You're late." The woman removed her hood. Her face was Wendy. Older, sharper, empty. Not a memory. A duplicate. Hook grinned. She's going to kill the girl herself. And far beyond it, the anchor tower, now pulsing like a heartbeat made of clockwork and grief. The sky above it flickered. "Is that smoke?" Cale asked. Peter's jaw tightened. Worse. The clouds were spinning, unraveling, spiraling down toward the trees like coils of molten silk, and from within them something moved. A low sound began to rise, not a roar, not a scream. A summoning. Wendy stepped forward, her fingers tightening around the locket. "They're coming, aren't they?" Peter nodded slowly. Hook released the Neverbeasts. Elsewhere, the howling fields. The first one rose like a mountain, pulling free of the earth. It had 6 legs, all wrong, a face like a lion carved in broken glass, eyes that blinked in different directions. Its body was wrapped in strips of memory, each one engraved with names no one remembered anymore. It let out a cry that made the trees bleed. Dozens followed. Some swam through air, some slithered on shadows, some stepped from old storybooks half-burned and long abandoned. Each of them smelled of ending, and all of them were marching south toward Peter, toward Wendy, toward the last stand of the lost. Back at the hollow tree, panic, preparation, the final hour before the storm. Wendy stood on a branch above the main camp, watching the lost boys arm themselves. Most were barely more than memory-hardened wanderers, but they were hers now, just as much as they were Peter's. Peter joined her, eyes distant. "How many?" Wendy asked. "Too many. Can we stop them?" He didn't answer. She turned to him. "Peter." He looked at her. "We won't all survive this." She nodded. "But you will." He looked down. "No, I won't." Before she could reply, Cale climbed up to them, panting. "There's something else," he said. "Something worse." He handed Wendy a crumpled page. ripped from a book long thought burned. A sketch. A face. Hers. But older. Colder. Wendy stared at it. This isn't me. No, Peter whispered, that's her. Who? Your replacement. Flashback Hook's chamber. When Hook failed to break Wendy, he built another. A version of her sculpted from grief, rage, and twisted memory. He called her Wendigo, his final weapon. Not a doppelganger, not a shadow. A perfected predator. Wendy's blood, her voice, her face. But without her soul. Later, as dusk breaks into chaos, the first Neverbeast struck just before midnight. It didn't roar. It sang. A broken nursery rhyme that made the trees curl away from its breath. The lost boys fired enchanted arrows. Blades forged from belladonna cracked on its hide. One boy screamed as it swallowed his name instead of his flesh. Peter leapt into the fray, sword flashing. But he couldn't fly. And the beasts didn't bleed. Wendy fought beside him, her locket blazing with each strike. The memory inside it, her mother's laugh cut deeper than steel. They took down the first, then a second. But with each that fell, more came. And above them, the clouds tore open, revealing her. Wendigo. She floated on wind that didn't exist. Her eyes glowed silver. Her hair hung like ropes. She wore Wendy's smile like a mask stretched too tight. Peter froze. Cale backed away. Wendy stepped forward. Who are you? Wendigo tilted her head. I'm the better version, the one who doesn't hesitate, the one who finishes the story. She extended her hand. The Neverbeast stopped. Even the sky seemed to hush. Come with me, Wendigo said, and I'll let them live. Peter reached for his blade. But Wendy stepped forward and took Wendigo's hand. The wind screamed. The beasts roared. And Wendy was gone. Peter collapsed to his knees. Cale shouted, "What are you doing?" Peter didn't move. She's going to Hook, he whispered, alone. Cale grabbed his shoulder. We go after her now. Peter shook his head. No. He stood. We go after her as an army. Far away, the anchor tower. Wendigo stood beside Hook. Wendy lay unconscious on an altar of iron feathers and ash, her wrists bound in vines that hissed. She came willingly, Wendigo said. Hook smiled, then she'll give me everything. The tower surged with power. The sky cracked again, and the stars began to fall. Chapter 18, Wendy's Choice. There are moments that split time. Not with clocks, but with choices. This was one of them. Anchor Tower, the chamber of unmaking. Wendy awoke in chains made of memory. They weren't cold. They weren't heavy. They were familiar. Each vine that wrapped around her wrists hummed with echoes. Her mother's lullaby, her brother's laughter, Peter's voice whispering her name. That's what made them so hard to fight. She sat on an altar of stone shaped like a cradle. The floor below her pulsed with golden light, fed by veins of belladonna running through the tower. And overhead, the sky had broken wide open. The stars were falling. Across the chamber stood Hook. Clad in robes of white thread and black glass, his left hand glowing faintly where the claw had once been. His face was calm, peaceful even, as though he were finally home. Wendigo stood beside him like a statue. She hadn't moved since Wendy woke. Good, Hook said, you're awake. Wendy didn't reply. He stepped closer. You understand now, don't you, why this must happen? You're going to kill me, she said flatly. Hook smiled softly. No, I'm going to fold you back in. The island doesn't need duplicates, it needs resolution. And then you become Peter, she said. No, he replied, I become better. Outside the jungle edge. Peter stood before his army. What remained of the lost boys, those who hadn't run, those who hadn't forgotten? Cale at his side, blade drawn. Above them the sky trembled. Peter looked out at them and said nothing. He simply opened his arms, and the wind returned. It wrapped around his body, not to lift him but to push him forward. "I'm not your king," he said. "I'm not your savior, I'm just the boy who stayed." He looked at them. "She's the girl who came back." And then he charged. And they followed. Inside the tower, Wendy looked at Wendigo. "You don't have to do this." Wendigo blinked. "I'm not you." "No," Wendy said. "You're almost me. You remember enough, you feel enough. That's why you're hesitating." Wendigo's lips twitched. Hook watched quietly. Don't listen to her, she was made to fracture. But Wendy didn't speak to him. She only looked at her other self. "I forgive you," she whispered. Wendigo's hands trembled. And then, she reached for Wendy's chains. Hook raised his hand. Too late. The door exploded inward. Peter, sword blazing, eyes wild, blood on his shirt. Behind him, chaos, never beasts screaming, lost boys clashing with constructs, the tower beginning to fall apart. Hook bared his teeth. No. He lunged for Wendy. But Wendigo turned and caught his arm. Their eyes met. "You were never worthy," she whispered. And she shoved him into the altar's core. The shattering, light, heat, sound, the belladonna exploded. Not violently, not fire, memory. It burst through the tower like a tidal wave, every forgotten name, every buried truth, every shadowed smile. It filled the sky, the sea, the forest. And with it, Neverland shook. Peter grabbed Wendy as the altar collapsed. Wendigo stood in the center of the light, arms wide, eyes calm. She looked at Wendy one last time and smiled. Behold. Then she vanished. Later, Wendy awoke at the edge of the sea. The tower gone. The sky whole again. The stars quiet. Peter sat beside her, bruised, silent. "She made the choice," he said. Wendy nodded. "So did I." He looked at her. "Are you okay?" "No," she whispered, "but I will be." They stood. And far across the island where the tower had stood, flowers began to grow. Chapter 19, Pan's War. Neverland didn't have seasons. But tonight it felt like autumn. A dying breath, brittle and gold. The war ground just beyond the tower's ashes. Where the anchor tower once rose, a vast field now stretched, barren, cracked, and ringed by fireflies made of fractured memory. They hovered in swarms, blinking with fragments of forgotten names, whispering lullabies to no one. This was where the final battle would be waged. Not for victory, for ownership of the story. At dawn, Peter stood at the edge of the field, a black sash tied around one arm, not for mourning, for remembrance. Beside him, Wendy tightened her belt, her dagger glinting in the half-light. Her locket rested against her heart, silent, warm. Tinker Bell's glow was gone, but her essence remained in the wind, in the echo of magic curling through the trees. Cale joined them, his arm in a sling, blood dried on his jaw. "The lost are ready," he said. "What's left of them?" Peter looked toward the horizon. "He's coming." From the east, Hook returned. But not as he had been. Not regal, not composed. He rode atop a living beast made of coiled metal and bone, forged from the ruins of the tower. A serpent with wings, a crown of teeth. Hook wore no mask now. His face was cracked, ancient. His right hand, human once more, burned with belladonna light. The claw was gone, replaced by something worse. Control. Behind him marched the remains of the island's madness, never-beasts, corrupted fairies, memory-warped echoes of old, lost boys who had not been saved. Hook raised his fist, and the earth split. The battle begins. Peter flew, not with wings but with fury. He clashed with Hook midair, their blades meeting in a shower of sparks and tears. "You're just a wound," Hook roared. "And you're just what I left behind," Peter shouted. They struck again, clawing, cutting, falling. Wendy led the Lost in a charge through the eastern trench, flanking Hook's army. She moved like a storm, silent, deliberate, unstoppable. Her locket glowed brighter with each scream. Each saved life. Cale faced his brother, resurrected from the shadow, and when the battle turned, he made the hardest choice. He let him go. The battlefield was a living nightmare. Trees wept, the air screamed, the stars turned red. But they held. The duel. Peter and Hook crashed to the forest floor, blades locked, hands bloodied. "You destroyed her," Hook gasped. "You destroy everyone." Peter panted, "She chose me. She died for you." Peter's eyes burned. "No, she died to stop you." Hook's scream shook the ground. He raised his hand. A final pulse of belladonna shot skyward toward the stars. Wendy's choice again. She saw it rising, saw what Hook meant to do. Collapse time, rewind Neverland, undo the war, undo the pain, undo her. She raised her mother's locket and whispered a single word. "No." The light turned inward. The explosion curved back. Time bent. The collapse. Hook was caught in the loop, trapped in his own rewrite. He looked at Wendy in horror. "What have you done?" She stared at him calm. "I finished the story." Hook screamed and was erased. After, the sky broke into gold. The Neverbeast howled once, then fell silent. The forest grew quiet. The lost boys emerged from shadow blinking. Some wept, some fell to their knees. The war was over, and Neverland was whole again. Peter stood with blood on his hands and tears in his eyes. Wendy took his hand, and together they walked toward the horizon. Not to escape, but to begin. Chapter 20. The Sky Bleeds Stars. It began with silence, then song, then light. 3 days later, Neverland reborn. The war was over, but the story was not. The forest had begun to regrow in strange ways, flowers blooming in spirals, trees with bark like glass, streams that whispered names thought lost. Time still moved oddly here, but now it no longer ran in circles. It breathed, and the sky, oh, the sky bled stars. They fell slowly each night like ash made of fire, not in destruction, in tribute. Each star a story, each story a soul. Wendy sat at the edge of the singing tree, its white branches humming beneath her fingers. She had not slept. Since Hook's fall, her dreams were louder. She remembered everything now. Her mother's laughter, her own forgotten lullabies, the way her childhood had never ended. It had just become something harder, sharper, realer. Peter stood behind her, quiet, still barefoot, still not flying. He hadn't tried. "I saw your face in the sky last night," he said. She looked up. "Just a story," she murmured. "No," Peter said. "You're the ending I never gave." At the hollow tree, the lost boys, those who'd stayed, those who'd returned, those newly found, built new structures from the bones of the war. Not forts, not battle posts. Homes. Some stayed. Some left. Some turned into birds and vanished into legend. Cale stood with his back to a setting sun, hands buried in soil, planting something new. Peter approached him. They didn't speak. They just looked at the grave nearby, small, stone-marked, simple. Tinker Bell. A single word was carved beneath her name. Starlight. That night, the final starfall. The last star fell at midnight. It streaked across the sky in a line of violet and gold, splitting the heavens from horizon to horizon. And from its light, something descended. Not a god, not a ghost. Just a memory returning home. Wendy stood at the beach alone, her feet buried in warm sand. Behind her, the island glowed. Ahead, the sea was endless. Peter joined her, silent. "I could stay," she said. "I know," he replied. She turned to him, "But I shouldn't." "No," he said, "but you'll always be part of this." "I want to forget," she whispered. Peter reached into his coat and pulled out a crystal. "Belladonna." She looked at it, then at him. "No," she said, "not this time." She handed it back. "I'll carry it all." Peter nodded, once proud, sad. "You're not the girl I brought here," he said. Wendy smiled. "No, I'm the woman who walked out." The farewell. At dawn, a boat waited, woven from starlight and willow roots, stitched with the wind. Wendy stepped in. Cale saluted her from shore. The lost boys raised lanterns. Peter didn't speak, he just watched. As the boat drifted out, Wendy looked back. She raised her hand. He didn't wave, but his shadow did. The sky over London. A falling star crossed the clouds. In a quiet home on the edge of Kensington Gardens, a girl woke from a dream she didn't remember. She sat up, walked to the window. And there, just for a second, she saw a boy. Smiling. And gone. Chapter 21. The Girl Who Stayed Behind. Not everyone leaves Neverland. Not everyone was meant to. Some are called to stay. And some choose to. Weeks later, the rebirth of the island. Neverland was healing. The scars of war had become part of its story. Bone flowers now grew from burned earth, and crystal water flowed where blood once soaked the ground. The magic was wilder now, freer, no longer bound to Peter alone, nor fractured through time. It belonged to the island again, and to those who stayed. At the hollow tree, new voices filled the glade, children who'd found their way through mirrors, through dreams, through grief too heavy to carry. Lost boys, lost girls, some grown, some scarred, none forgotten. And at their center stood a girl in green and gold. Wendy, but not the one who left. This Wendy had a sword at her hip, a ring of vines braided through her hair, and belladonna ink across her shoulder in the shape of a feather. She was not a guest. She was a guardian. The decision. Peter had offered her passage home. She stepped onto the boat, she had. But halfway through the mist, she turned back. The starlight boat waited, unsure. She looked to the sky and saw the island's story wasn't done. She stepped into the water and walked back. Peter met her on the beach, barefoot. "You changed your mind," he said. "No," she replied. "I just remembered who I am." Now in the heart of the forest, she sat beneath the singing tree, telling stories to the new arrivals. Not lies, not myths, truths. About a boy who couldn't grow up. About a girl who did. About a shadow who learned how to grieve. About a fae who burned too bright. About a monster who loved too deeply. And about choice. That every child had one. Stay, go, remember, forget. But only if they chose for themselves. Peter watched from the trees. He no longer led. He followed. He walked beside the ones who needed him, then stepped back. And as he watched Wendy speak, strong, laughing, scarred, he smiled. The island was hers now, as much as his. One night a stranger came. Not a child. An adult. Eyes like storm clouds, a voice like a torn page. He asked, "Is this the place for the broken?" Wendy looked at him. No. He turned to leave. She touched his arm. It's the place for those who want to heal. He stayed. Wendy, the grown girl, the guardian. She no longer carried a sword every day. Sometimes she planted trees. Sometimes she wrote in journals she would never publish. Sometimes she sat by the sea and spoke to her mother in the tide. But always, always she chose. That was the gift Neverland gave her. That was what she protected. Not eternal childhood, but the freedom to become. Chapter 22. The Boy Who Walked into Time. There is a place beyond the edge of Neverland. A place not found on maps, where time is kept. No one rules it. No one understands it. But one boy once dared to walk there. And that boy was Peter Pan. After Wendy stayed, he wandered. Not aimlessly. Peter never did anything without some part of him knowing the way, but his steps took him farther than he had ever gone. Beyond the hollow tree, beyond the tower's ruins, beyond the singing tree's reach, through a forest of glass leaves that chimed like bells, across a river that whispered backwards, to a mountain that bled golden sand from its peak. And at its summit he found a door. Old, wooden, carved with the mark of a clock face split in two. Peter stood before it for a long time. Flashback Peter as a boy. The first time he'd heard about this place was from an old lost boy who vanished the next day. Time lives at the edge, the boy had said, and it's hungry. Peter hadn't believed him. Not then. Now he understood. He opened the door and stepped into the archive of time. A hall of infinite staircases. Mirrors showing years that never happened. Books that wrote themselves in blood. And at its center, a well bottomless poolsing with light. Each drop in the well was a second stolen, a regret buried, a breath never taken. Peter stepped to the edge. The well spoke in memory, not words. It showed him. Tinker Bell smiling, fatting. Hook laughing, breaking. Wendy turning back. His own eyes growing tired. And then it asked the question, do you want to become real? Peter froze. Real. Not eternal. Not magical. Mortal. A boy no longer, a man with time. A life. A death. He sat for a while, staring, thinking, remembering. Then he stood and said, yes, the transformation. It didn't hurt. It didn't glow. It simply happened. The magic in him untwisted. The wind inside his blood settled. His shadow folded into his body like it had always belonged. His heartbeat slowed. But it beat. For the first time, Peter Pan became Peter Darling. And he smiled. Back in Neverland, Wendy woke in the middle of the night. No reason. Just a feeling. She walked outside, the island calm, and found him standing in the moonlight, taller, older, different. She didn't speak. He didn't either. She just walked to him and hugged him. He held her tighter than ever before. Is it really you? She whispered. He nodded. I walked into time. She touched his face. Was it worth it? Peter smiled faintly. I think so. Later that year, Peter built a home with walls and a roof and a door that opened in both directions. Some said he'd finally grown up. They were wrong. He'd just grown in. The island watched quietly, and for the first time in its strange, endless life, Neverland rested. Chapter 23. The Mirror in the Water. Every island has a heart. Neverland isn't buried in earth or stone. It lies beneath the Stillwater Pool, a body of water that reflects not the sky, but the soul. the edge of the Stillwater pool. Wendy stood alone. The moon above was perfect tonight, round and clear, unmarred by war, memory, or magic. The air was quiet, and the pool before her shimmered with a surface so smooth it might have been glass. She stepped forward and looked in, and saw not her face, but possibility. The mirror's trick. The pool didn't reflect the now. It showed the what-ifs. In the glass-like surface she saw herself as a child, never leaving London, dreaming of boys who never grew up. Herself with Hook's eyes, power-hungry, heart hollow. Herself still on that altar, saying yes to Wendigo's offer. Herself grown old, penning children's books no one believed. Each flickered like a ripple. And then she saw her mother. Not as she died, but as she lived. Laughing, holding baby Wendy. Standing beside Peter, smiling, her hair braided with starlight. Wendy knelt beside the pool, breath caught. She whispered, "What did you want me to become?" And the pool answered with a vision of her now, standing at the edge of Neverland, fierce, flawed, free. She cried then, not because of pain, because for the first time in her life, she understood. Behind her, Peter watched. He didn't interrupt, didn't speak. He knew what the mirror showed. He stood here too, once, when he still wore wings, when he still thought he could outfly pain. Now he simply waited. When Wendy stood and turned to him, her eyes were red but calm. "It doesn't lie," she said. "No," Peter agreed, "but it doesn't decide either." She nodded, and together they stepped back from the water. Later at the hollow tree, Wendy added a new page to the old ledger, a thick book passed down from guardian to guardian. "I looked into the pool today. I saw 100 versions of myself. I chose this one." She closed the book. Outside, lost boys and girls gathered for stories, not to forget, to remember differently. Peter sat nearby, carving a flute from bonewood. Cale taught a child how to track footprints in moonlight. Peace wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Far beneath the island, in the deepest roots, in the places even Peter never dared to name, the pool's reflection reached something old. A seed, a memory. It stirred, but instead of rising in hunger, it sighed in rest, and slept again. Chapter 24, The Final Story. Not every story ends with a battle. Some end with a choice, and some don't end at all. The hollow tree, dusk. The days in Neverland had grown longer. Not by time, but by feeling. The light hung in the sky like a promise, warm, patient, unhurried. Trees bore fruit that didn't rot. Flowers blinked open only when sung to. The air itself smelled of ink and rain. Wendy sat beside the fire with a new journal on her lap. It was blank, not because there were no stories left, but because this one had reached its edge. Peter sat across from her, rolling a smooth stone in his palm. He hadn't spoken in a while. He was thinking about the final page. "What happens next?" a lost boy asked. Wendy looked up. The boy was barely 15, freckles, a small scar by his left eye. His voice was quiet, but it carried. Cale stood near the fire too. Others had gathered, silent, curious. Peter looked at Wendy. Wendy looked at the boy. She closed the journal softly and smiled. "That depends." "On what?" "On who writes it." A long pause. Peter stood. He didn't rise like a king or a god. He rose like a boy who had finally rested enough. "I've written long enough," he said. "I think it's her turn." He nodded to Wendy, and then to the lost. "All of you." That night the story is passed. Around the fire, each child told their version. One said Neverland began as a single tear fallen from a broken star. One said it was born in the last dream of the first orphan. One said it had no beginning and maybe no end. Wendy didn't interrupt. She just wrote it down. All of it. Every lie, every truth, every heart. She wasn't recording the facts of Neverland anymore. She was recording the myth. Later, at the edge of the sea, Peter stood alone on the cliff where he once watched Hook's ship burn. Wendy joined him. "You're leaving," she said. He nodded, "Not far." She waited. "I'm not needed like I was. You changed that. Will I see you again?" Peter looked out to the horizon. "You'll see pieces in stars, in tide, in story. And if I forget," he smiled, "then I'll remind you." She touched his hand. He kissed her forehead, then stepped back and vanished. Not into shadow, into memory. The final page. Wendy returned to the hollow tree. She opened the journal and wrote, "This is the story of a boy who never grew up, a girl who did, a monster who wanted to be loved, a fairy who burned too bright, a war waged not with swords but with stories." And it ends here. But if you ever find your way to the edge of sleep, listen for the wind. You just might hear him laugh. Chapter 25, Neverland. There are places the world forgets. Corners in dreams. Shadows in old books. Whispers in wind. And among them, one name always lingers. Neverland. Years later, Earthside. The girl who stayed once returned. Her hair had silver now, her hands had calluses. Her smile had grown quieter but no less full. She wore no crown, no wings, no magic. Just memory. Wendy walked through Kensington Gardens in late autumn, the air crisp, the leaves burning red. At her side walked a boy. Her son. He had her eyes, his father's quiet patience, and the same question all children carry. "Is it real?" he asked. She stopped beside a bench carved long ago, beneath a statue of a boy frozen in flight. She sat and nodded. "Yes," she said, "but not always." He blinked. "How can something be real sometimes?" Wendy smiled. "Because sometimes we need it to be." Back in Neverland, the island remained. It always had, it always would. But not as a prison, not as an escape, not even as a story. As a choice. The hollow tree now bore blossoms that told stories in the wind. The singing tree no longer mourned, it harmonized with laughter. The bone orchard had been cleared. In its place, a garden. New guardians watched over it. Children grew old when they wished. Some left. Some stayed. Some returned. And the stars, they still bled. But now they bled light. The final memory. Somewhere far from maps and time, a boat made of feathers and fire drifted over still water. At its helm stood a man. Not a boy. Not quite. He wore green no longer, but he smiled like he used to. Peter Pan. Or perhaps just Peter. He watched the stars fall into the water, listened to the wind that carried laughter, and whispered something soft enough to be forgotten. Except that it was. Because in every child's dream, in every page turned, in every "I don't want to grow up," he still is. Not as the boy who refused to change, but as the one who finally did. And Neverland. It didn't end. It waited. For you. The end. And perhaps the beginning.